I wanted to start off by giving you the Jewish take on Now, Valentine's Day, starts with the word saint. It's not exactly a Jewish holiday. But if you want the Jewish version on love, what do you say? You say, I love you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say to the husbands, their children, I love you. But what is really I love you? I come first, love, and then you. You're last in the equation.
Your
Version,
phone is,
you,
your
I
phone
love
is on a,
you come first, and I and love. Together we share love. So in marriage, in Judaism, or not even in any relationship, you always has to come first. The other person, you put the other person first, and not your ego, not the I. Then you have love. You, I love. So my cousin told me a story that she is the Chabad Shlucha on Emory College, and it was Valentine's Day. And even though we don't celebrate, her husband's a rabbi. He has to say something to the 200 students in the tent eating there. So he told them this concept, you I love. Fast forward 5 years later, he gets invited to two students who met at Emory, two Jewish students met at Emory, a boy and a girl, and they were getting married, and they invited him to be the rabbi, to officiate. And the bride shows him her ring. Inside, she inscribed, you I love. So 5 years later, he thought he's speaking to the walls, right? Which student is listening to the rabbi, you I love. So I heard this and I said to myself, exactly, you I love. That's really the true way of sharing. It's you first, then I. Together we have love. Because I love you, it's about me. It's all about me. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. At the end of today's class, I'm gonna share the 4 mitzvahs of Purim. Next Thursday is a fast day, the fast of Esther. And next Friday is Purim. So Thursday we're not gonna have a class. But good morning, Diane, good morning.
Morning.
Thursday night, the mitzvah is at dark, when it's nightfall, you hear the reading of the Megillah, and then Friday during the day or in the morning, you hear the reading of the Megillah again. And then I'll discuss the mitzvahs at the end of the class. But Purim is coming next week. And Thursday is a fast from morning to night. And at the end of the class, I'll explain a little bit about the fast of Esther. But I wanted to start off with today's Torah portion, which is called Terumah. And I have to tell you that this Torah portion has in it such fundamental, powerful lessons and insights that are eternal. Always the Torah portion has eternal message, because this week's Torah portion is something spectacular. I know I say that every week, but really is very spectacular. So there are 2 beggars sitting in front of the cathedral in New York City on Fifth Avenue. There's a huge cathedral. One is dressed like a Jew, a yarmulke, tzitzis. Each one has and the other guy like a regular beggar, with a cap, in tattered clothes, and each one has a cup and they're collecting money. And a guy is watching how these 2 beggars are collecting money in front of the cathedral. Of course, everyone is giving the guy who's not a Jew. So he calls over the beggar who's a Jew and he says to him, come here, come here. I don't know if you realize, but you know where you're sitting. You're sitting in front of the cathedral. If you want to make a little more money, I suggest you move away, go to another location. No one's going to give you money here, whereas your friend is raking it in. So he sits back down on the steps near the other beggar and he says, Beryl, look who's telling us how to do business.
Very funny.
The 2 Jewish beggars in front of the cathedral. So this week's Torah portion opens up with a spectacular, spectacular statement. And I always like to read it so that you should believe that it's coming from the Torah.
Filchy sound.
Daber Hashem el Moshe.
Yeah.
Moshe. And God is speaking now to Moshe. Remember, they got the Torah. They're in the desert. traveling to the land of Israel. Now God says to Moshe, listen what he tells Moshe, tell the Jewish people, Vayikhu li Terumah me'es kol ish asher yidbenu libai. God says to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel and have them give to me, take to me a contribution, how each person's heart inspires him to give. Okay, so Hashem says to Moshe, tell the Jewish people to take to me, this is the verse, take to me a contribution. Terumah means a contribution, as each of their hearts desire. Why is God collecting contributions? Because they're building now the mini temple, the Mishkan, the traveling tabernacle that's going to travel with them throughout the desert till they come to the land of Israel. So they had a traveling temple, it's called the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Now it's a very strange phrase. When you ask somebody for a contribution, what do you say? Anybody here ever asked someone to give for their Hadassah or the synagogue or their circle of friends? You say, could you
donate, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
To donate, to give funds. I don't know. Trying to think of.
Give me a donation. Plain, simple English. Give me a donation. Give me tzedakah, right? Give me a contribution. Why does God say to Moshe, take to me a contribution? Take to me. Take from me a contribution. What? So Rashi says, the classic commentator, very simple. What did God say to Moshe? Take from me, take for my benefit, because you're building me a tabernacle. Okay. That's a nice answer. We're not going to say it's not a nice answer. It's a very pleasant answer. And we could move forward from that. But I think we need to dig a little deeper. We always like to dig. Go ahead, Jane.
Is it take from me? Is that what it is? Oh, well, God gave us everything anyway, so now we're giving it back.
Jane, take over the class. That's exactly I don't want to share. Say it one more time.
I'm sorry?
Repeat it one more time for everyone.
So God is saying, take from me, meaning because God gave us everything we have. So it's really God's to begin with. It's not really ours. So we're taking from what he gave us and putting it back.
Exactly. Herein, in this one passage, we learn one of the most fundamental principles of giving, sharing, tzedakah. One of the most fundamental principles of giving tzedakah. When you give tzedakah, when you share your money, or if you're giving clothing, or if you're giving a cooked meal to somebody, any act of goodness and kindness that you're sharing or giving, you have to take first from what you have. Who gives you what you have? God, James said.
And then I'll go for sound.
So take
30 minutes ago, it was not snowing. Now it's
from me. God is teaching
and pretty quickly.
Mitzvah is
And then start again.
Wait a minute.
what's the multi-layered mitzvah? The multi-layered mitzvah is you're taking from God because God gives you everything you have, and then you're sharing it and you're giving it. And that's God's greatest enjoyment. That's God's greatest enjoyment, that we acknowledge that that we can only give because we took. We can only give because we have. How do we have? We have from God everything. And then it gives you a whole new paradigm of how you look at your giving. There's a story told of Moses Montefiore. He was one of the wealthiest men in England. He was advisor to the Queen. And there was always anti-Semites in the court that tried to undermine him. Because they hated him. He was a Jew. How could he be the favorite advisor of the Queen, the Jew? So they would always try to backstab him or undercut him with the Queen. He gave an interview to a newspaper and they asked him, Sir Montefiore, how much are you worth? Like asking Bill Gates. So he says, this year, I'm worth 5 million pounds. The advisors came to the Queen. They said, this is your chief advisors? He lies. Everyone knows he's worth over 200 million pounds. How could he tell the newspaper he's only worth 5 million pounds? What a liar he is. So she calls him in and she confronts him. She says, Sir Moses, I read the article about you. How could you say you're only worth 5 million pounds? How does that look that my chief advisor doesn't tell the truth? He says, Your Majesty, I am only worth 5 million pounds this year. You know why? Because 5 million pounds is what I gave for tzedakah, for charity this year. That is mine because I gave it. Can never be taken away from me. The other 100 million or whatever I own, God could take away from me any minute. It's not mine. It's a gift from God. What I only own what I give. That's mine forever because I got it and I gave it. So she looked at him and she said, Sir Moses, now I know why you're my chief advisor. She respected him even more. So what we give is what we own is only what we give. That you can claim forever because you never know what tomorrow will bring. So now when you look at giving from that perspective, it takes on a whole new reality. A whole new reality. Esther Junger, I spoke in our shul many years ago. The first time she came to Fairfield County was into our shul. Very powerful speaker, if you remember her, of blessed memory. She says, why don't people give? Why don't people give more generously tzedakah? She says, they try. They put their hand in their pocket, but then something happens. It gets stuck. It doesn't come out. She said, it doesn't come out. She says you have to train yourself that you put your hand in your pocket, but remember to take it out. She had a very interesting take. You know, when you left your lecture, you wanted to give tzedakah, you wanted to keep Shabbos. She inspired everyone in the audience so amazingly. Like I wanted to write out 25 checks after I spoke to her, after I heard her lecture. So what's one more insight about tzedakah, and then we'll move on, is there was a very wealthy person. Whenever somebody came to him for tzedakah, he smiled, he gave them a drink, but he said to them, you'll see. But no one ever left with any money from him. He passes away, he goes up to the heavenly court, and they say to him, you know, you deserve to go into the Garden of Eden, to heaven. But you know, there's one thing lacking, you never gave tzedakah, and you know, you were very wealthy. It's not like you were poor. How do you justify it? He says, aha, you'll see. He takes out his checkbook, and for 10 minutes, he's writing out a check to every organization that came to him in his lifetime. He had a list. And he puts the pile of checks on the counter of the court, and he says, you see? So the bailiff taps him on the shoulder, the angel bailiff, and says, sir, did you see the sign? He says, what sign? He looks up, there's a sign. Receipts only. In heaven, receipts only. It's too late. To give it down on earth.
I love it.
In heaven, you can only show receipts. There's no writing out checks. So what God is telling the Jewish people, I give you so that you could give. You have to be a taker from God in order to give. It's a give and take relationship. God gives you so that you take from God and then you give from God. And when we realize this in our lives, it opens up the doors. All right. God gave me so that I could give. God gave me that I could give. So this is what God says to Moshe. Tell the Jewish people to give from their heart's desire, as generously as they want to give. In other words, there was no set amount. When God collected the half a shekel, if you remember, we discussed every Jew gave a half a shekel because no one's a whole, everyone together is halves. That was the recommended tzedakah that they were told to give. That was a mitzvah to give a half a shekel, not more, not less. But here God is saying the doors are open. Give whatever your heart desires, God says. So there were those Jews that gave gold, silver, copper, and then there were Jews that gave fabric, wood, goats here to make the walls and the tapestries and so on. So Kabbalah says something very fascinating, that when it says give according to your heart's desire, is that people gave as was a reflection of who they were. How you perceive yourself is sometimes what you give. How you look at yourself is how you give, by the way. If you remember the story with Cain and Abel, right?
Mhm.
They wanted to bring an offering to God. So Abel brought the best and best of his fruit. And Cain brought a wounded animal thinking, God doesn't need to eat. A wounded animal's fine. Why should I give the best? So God's fire only burnt down the gift from Abel, not Cain. Cain was upset. Why did he accept his gift and not mine? So people give the way they are. We're not talking about someone who doesn't have money. So you say, of course, the guy gave $1 million and I only gave $50. I don't have $1 million. It's more how you give. So giving here, everyone gave is a reflection of who their personality is at times. So how we give also is a reflection of who we are. Not only quantity, how much, how we give, how we give. That's why God says, according to their heart's desire, who they are is how they're going to give. And now a very, very beautiful story happens. The women donated their copper mirrors. Their copper mirrors. Copper is valuable. So a whole bunch of copper mirrors appeared in the donation bin. So Moses was a little bit surprised. He said to God, how could I take a mirror, an object of vanity, and melt it down and use it for the Mishkan, God's holy resting place, right?
Mhm.
But God said, you have it all wrong. These copper mirrors are the most valuable gift of all from the women. Why?
It was meaningful
Why were these
Because-
copper mirrors? Who
because it
remembers?
was meaningful to the
And
women.
it's their vanity that they're giving us.
Yeah, but right, exactly. Why did God say this is the greatest gift and all, and you should fashion the sinks in the temple, in the tabernacle from these mirrors? All the sinks were fashioned from copper. The kior, the sink was fashioned from the copper of the mirrors. Who remembers what happened in Egypt when Pharaoh made the decree to kill all the babies, the baby boys? Go ahead, Jane. Unmute yourself.
They decided to entice their husbands to have more babies.
They beautified. Remember the story? They
And
beautified
yes,
themselves. They enticed their husbands and they multiplied. They didn't listen to the decree of Pharaoh. Their faith in them made them actualize and say, listen, we're not going to fall into this trap. God said he's taking us out. We're having those children. So God said this was the greatest gift. It represents the faith of the women, the emunah of the women. It was their perseverance, their faith that you merited to be rescued and saved from Egypt. Redeemed from Egypt. That's the right word. I lost that word for a minute. So here again, you see how the women shine, no pun intended, with the mirrors, that the sinks of the sink of the tabernacle is made from these copper mirrors. What a beautiful story, documented in the Torah. It's amazing, you know. I look at the story and I'm like, wow, you know. I have one more psychological insight I want to share. If you go through the story of the Exodus, you see a lot of complaining going on. Remember how we discussed the Jews yelled at Moshe, why did you come here? Now we have to make our own bricks. You confronting Pharaoh made it even more difficult for us to do slave labor. Remember that?
Yep.
Then they come out of Egypt and they complain that they're at the sea. Now they're going to die in the ocean. Let's go back to Egypt. Why'd you bring us here? And then they cross the sea and they're hungry. There's nothing to eat. They're starving, so they get manna. Then they don't like manna because it looks the same every day, even though it tastes differently. We want real chicken. We want real roast beef. And then there's no water, they complain. Then they come to the Mount Sinai and they make a golden calf because they can't find Moshe. They miscount the days. So look at the psychological insight here. What's going on? The Jews are complainers, right? Remember, they're known, they're kvetching, they're complaining all the time. Now, we're talking generally. The women didn't complain. There were a lot of fasts that didn't complain. Now, you look at the story of the building of the Mishkan, where they actually have to give and collect and start building this extravagant, detailed, very detail-oriented tabernacle. This was not a little tent in the desert. This was precise. Every centimeter, every object had to be exactly the way God said. Cedar wood was cedar wood. And Tchela's blue wool had to be blue wool. You couldn't substitute for red wool because the fabric store didn't have the right color. And you hear one complaint? Not one complaint. Not one complaint. So this insight that I want to share is government, state, politics is what can they give us? What is in it for me? But society is what's in it for us, community. So when everything was given to them, complaints, this is no good and that's no good and we should have stayed behind. Miracles galore, but we don't care. This isn't good enough. Now they're taking on the building of the tabernacle from their own energy, from their own skills, from their own donations. It builds community. It builds unity. It builds leadership and strength. This is what God wanted. Like my kids tell me, Ma, now that we're parents, we realized what you did was right. Before we used to say, she does this, she's so disciplined, this and that. Now, when you build yourself, when it's you doing it, it's your energy, your efforts, your donations, what happens? Your whole look on life takes on a new reality. And not one kvetch, not one complaint. This is why God says to the Jewish people, Asali mikdash, make me a tabernacle, v'shachanti b'saycham, and I will dwell within them. You're going to make me the tabernacle, but I'm going to dwell within them. What's the question?
Them.
Jane, you said something?
Them.
Right. How many were there?
All of them, whoever, the community, the whole community.
Right, but how many tabernacles did they build?
Oh, one.
So why does God say, make me a tabernacle and I will dwell within them?
Each person was a part of it.
Each person was part of it, very good. But more than that, this is not only talking about the tabernacle they built in the desert. This, as we're going to see in a few minutes, is talking about the tabernacle that is eternal. The tabernacle that is each and every one of us. Make me a tabernacle. Make every man, woman, and child a dwelling place for God. Like somebody asked the Kotzker Rebbe, where's God? Where can I find God? I went to Tibet, I didn't find God. I went to Israel, I didn't find God. I went to Europe, I didn't find God. I went into the caves and I didn't find God. And the Kotzker Rebbe said, that's right, God is in you. This is what Hashem is telling the Jewish people. Yes, make me now a tabernacle in the desert, but for eternity, every single person has to be a place that God dwells within you, which means every minute of your life is imbued with holiness, a mini tabernacle. When you eat, when you sleep, when you exercise, when you shop, when you do business, when you trade, when you sit around relaxing, when you're playing in the snow, every minute of your life, you are a tabernacle, a dwelling place for godliness and for holiness. This is what God is telling Moshe. Make me a tabernacle and I will dwell within them, each and every one of us. That's why there's one Torah portion on creation of the universe. God created the entire universe. There's one Torah portion, Genesis. 5 Torah portions on the building of the tabernacle. Why such detail? Because the building of the tabernacle is a prototype of life for each and every one of us. And we're going to discuss that in a minute. It's not only talking about a physical structure that will be known as the holy place where they brought the offerings and God's presence, the Shekhinah, known as God's presence, rests there. But it is you and me and our children that is the real tabernacle, the real resting place and dwelling place of God. So wherever you are, that's where God is. You can't run away.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, but it's also beautiful. Beautiful. Because you know why? We tend to look for God everywhere where God is not. And we forget that, you know what? God is within us. God is within us. You know, there's a very, very famous, how do you call a Buddhist monk? I don't know, I forgot the name. And he had thousands of followers. You couldn't get an appointment in Tibet with him. You couldn't get an appointment. This guy was like the guru of gurus.
Gandhi.
Like a Gandhi type, exactly. So anyway, this little old lady comes to Tibet, and she comes to the front door of his dwelling, and she demands to see him. They go, lady, look at the line. People wait for years to see the Gandhi, whatever. She says, no, he's going to want to see me. Well, this lady's crazy. She says, take me to your superior. So for some reason, they let her in, and she whispers into the superior ears. So they slowly let her in closer and closer. And the guru says, yeah, I'll see her all right. Send her in. She goes up to him. She said, Moshe, time to come home. Enough. Mother.
Love it.
Mother comes to fetch him home. Enough of the Mishigas, Moshe. Time to come home.
That was funny.
So Vasali Mikdash v'Shachanti b'Seicham is really defines our life on earth. That look at yourself now in the mirror and you see yourself in a different light. You don't see your wrinkles and you don't see your thinning hair and you don't see your nearsightedness. What do you see when you look in the mirror? You see that you are a receptacle for God, that you are a reflection of God's will on earth to dissolve. Why did God even want us? You know, we're such trouble. We complain, we kvetch, we deny God, we're hostile, we're arrogant, we're atheists. Sometimes we believe, sometimes we don't believe. Why did God need us? Really think about it. Are we more trouble? But God's greatest desire, the Kabbalah says, to dwell in this broken world, to dwell in a world that there's pain, there's sorrow, there's brokenness, there's tears, there's sadness, there's denial. God's greatest joy is when we, who are so limited, so finite, make a dwelling place for God in any way that we do it. Whether we light Shabbos candles, whether we pray, we put tzedakah into the tzedakah box, eat a kosher meal, say a blessing on food. All this gives God a dwelling place within ourselves. It's not complicated in that way. God gives us the instruction book, how to make ourselves a dwelling place. And also, if you think about it, I have to share this other little thought, that when did the whole concept of making a shul, a synagogue, a shtibel come? Where do we learn? There was no shul and shtibel in Europe, in Egypt. There was no shul and shtibel in the desert. They had the tabernacle. Then they come to Israel. They still have the traveling tabernacle. Then they build the first temple, remember, in Shiloh. The tabernacle was still in Shiloh. Then they build the first temple in Jerusalem, and it stands for 410 years. Then they build a second temple after the first one is destroyed years later, 7 years later, I think, and it stands for 420 years. Then is the destruction of the second temple. And then shuls start springing up all across the world. Shtibbles, shuls, synagogues, house of worships, right? Till after the destruction of the temple, there was no such a thing as a shul. Either you prayed in the temple and you brought your offering, or you stayed home till you could do that. So the God is telling the Jews here now, there'll be a time that you're going to have to make multiple shuls, multiple mishkans, multiple places to pray. There'll be a time you'll be exiled, you'll be spread over the entire universe, and you're going to need to have a shul. You're going to need to have a place that you pray to God. So this pasuk that says, make me a dwelling place and I'll dwell within them, is also a vision of what's going to be in the future to the Jewish people. There will be a time where we will be dispersed and you're going to need a place to go. A place where you can pray in unison with other Jewish people. So again, it's not only a story about what's happening now, it's a story about the future. So anyone want to add something, say something, complain?
Just wondering, when they're in the desert, how do they have, and they've been slaves, how do they have all these riches?
Unbelievable question. Okay, I'm going to answer that with a story because I wanted to share the story. But before I answer your question, I just want to say one more little thing. Remember, I mentioned that there's extensive detail in the building of the tabernacle. If God said to use techela's blue wool, they didn't go and say, well, we don't have enough blue, we're going to use purple, we're going to use red, we're going to use orange. Everything had to be exact, not 1 centimeter off, okay? Why the detail? And even more is, why does God really need such an expensive place to live? Well, a little shack, a little tent, a one-room igloo would be perfect. God is infinite. Is God really spending his nights there, roughing it? You know what I mean? Is God really living in the tabernacle? God is infinite. It's like saying we're going to make a tabernacle for light. We're going to put the light into a tabernacle. Think of God, the metaphor of light. Light doesn't get contained in a little box in a little house. So what is this whole elaborate tabernacle, first of all? With all the utensils, the tables, the menorah, the golden ark, the sink. It was gorgeous. Also, there was another thing built. What's another thing built back way that's also very detailed? Has to do with the flood.
Ark.
The ark.
That also made the ark precise measurements. And the answer is, says Chassidus, that first of all, it's all in the details, but again, teach us the entire universe, every cell, every atom, every drop of water, every snowflake is precise. If one cell is off in the body, you know what happens, God forbid. You say it's only a cell. If one nerve, sometimes, God forbid, gets severed, it could destroy a person's life. So precision in the tabernacle, again, is talking about precision in God's creation. It's symbolic that everything matters. Have you ever heard of the butterfly effect?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
who wants to share? Go ahead.
If the butterflies disappear, that has an effect on everything that eats the butterfly, that eats that animal, like it's a whole domino thing.
Anybody else know what the butterfly effect is? The famous butterfly effect. Okay, so you could look it up. It's amazing. It's so fascinating. I was reading about it. It was what's the butterfly effect? Do you know that if a certain butterflies flap their wings a certain amount of time, that could cause a tsunami across the world, in another part of the world? It's called butterfly effect. So what does it mean? That everything is so precise that a flapping of a butterfly's wing created by God could cause a tsunami in another part of the universe. And also, I don't know if you ever heard the theory of resonance. Not a theory. Anyone heard about resonance? Margaret, go ahead. Unmute. Tell us about resonance, because this is another beautiful.
I'm just thinking of those problems where they have with the bridges, where they're on a certain wavelength, and if they get into this thing, then the whole bridge can break. I mean, because it's tuned to a certain motion.
Positive and negative. The positive and negative in the universe. That's why batteries. Why do you put a battery positive and negative? And you need glasses because sometimes you put in the batteries wrong, right? But what did they realize while going on, Margaret? Armies, right? Armies fight wars and they cross bridges. How do armies march in formation? But every time they come to a bridge, they're told to go out of formation. Why? Formation, if they all march to the same formation, the bridge will collapse. That's called resonance. So every time an army marches over a bridge, they march out of formation because the synchronizing of their march can destroy the bridge, like what Margaret said. The wavelengths. Brilliant. So this is what the Torah God is telling. Exactly the way I tell you to build it. Exactly. With exact precise measurements, fabrics, wood, and so on. Because everything in the universe is precise. That's why, this is my own personal opinion, I can't imagine how somebody could think that the world came about on its own. Really, every organ, the way the blood pumps, the heart pumps blood, the liver, the kidneys, you mean to tell me that was made by the Big Bang or the theory of evolution? Really? It's hard to believe, you know what I mean? So now the answer to Margaret's question. But does anybody have any other questions before we say, how did they have all the stuff in the desert? So I'll start off like this. First of all, remember when they crossed the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, the water split? In the Medrash tells us that as they were crossing these few miles of ocean, there were a tremendous amount of treasures they found on the seabed. Tremendous amount of pearls and expensive things that were in the ocean, one. Put there also before creation, so they should have the wealth. Two, during the plague of darkness, the Torah describes how the Jews went into the homes of the Egyptians and took what was theirs. Their wages, stuff stolen from them, and what was rightfully theirs. God said, go take wealth from the Egyptians. It's your right. And thirdly, when the Egyptians drowned in the Reed Sea, they had a tremendous amount of wealth on them. Their own purses, even their own purses with gold and silver. And God made a miracle that all the valuables of the Egyptian soldiers, when they drowned, got swept to the side of the seashore. And it was a free-for-all. The Jews were permitted to collect all the treasures. So it says they left Egypt with tremendous wealth. They didn't need to sit on the steps of the cathedral and collect. And now I'll tell you a beautiful story about how did they have cedar wood. It says, build the Mishkan with cedar wood. How did they have cedar wood in the desert? The Torah tells us they had it. They took it out with Egypt, with them. Now, why would you schlep wood on a wagon when you're leaving Egypt? Who schleps wood? You think to yourself, when I get to where I'm going, I'll find oak, maybe I'll find cedar, maybe I'll find other wood. I'll get wood there. What am I going to schlep wood across the desert? Where did they have cedar wood? So I'm going to share with you a beautiful story. First, I have to share a little joke. Got to lighten it a little bit. So this guy, young boy, comes on his bicycle. Every Monday morning, he appears on the Mexican border to cross into the United States on his bicycle with 2 giant bags of sand. And of course, the border policeman who's always on that shift suspects this young boy. What's in those bags of sand? He's smuggling something. Who would schlep sand? So he makes him dump it out. And lo and behold, there's nothing in the bags. He makes him put it back. The boy cycles over the border. Every Monday, the Selba Maisa, the same story. He thinks the boy is smuggling for sure something in those bags. He's on his bicycle. He makes him empty the bags, fill the bags. Years and years go by. He can't find anything in those bags. He's very frustrated. He retires. He's on the beach on Miami Beach, sipping a tequila, and he sees this young boy is now a young man. He sees him in the distance. He runs over to him. He said, Pedro, tell me the truth now. I'm retired. I'm not going to arrest you. I'm not going to do anything to you. What were you smuggling every Monday? What were you smuggling? I know you were smuggling. He said, my bicycle. Every morning I drove my bicycle over the border. And I don't know if you noticed, I never came back with my bicycle. Every week I smuggled another bicycle over the border.
Very cute. I like that. I thought you were going to say sand for the beach. That's even better. I like that.
So now, where did the Jews get cedar wood? It's like where did the women get the tambourines? Remember the tambourines by the Reed Sea? They pull out the tambourines and they begin to dance. They brought it with them. So the story goes like this. I think it's beautiful. I didn't know if I should tell it, but Margaret asked, so I'm going to tell it. So it goes like this. Jacob, remember when Joseph is viceroy of Egypt, right? Everyone remembers?
Yep.
And the brothers discover their brother is alive. And he says to his brothers, tell dad to come down, settle here with me, and we will live in Egypt and we will prosper. So Jacob comes down to Egypt with his whole family and he plants cedar trees. He brings saplings from Israel and he plants them in Egypt. What does he tell his children? Dad, why are you planting cedar trees? Bismashuga. What do you need cedar wood in Egypt? He says to his children, there will be a time that you will be persecuted. You will be enslaved. You will be tortured. But when you look at the cedar trees that I planted from the land of Israel as they grow taller and taller here in Egypt, we look at them and remember that there is a prophecy, a promise from God to us that we will be taken out of this exile, out of this situation, out of this torture, and we will be brought to Eretz Yisrael, our promised land. Look at these trees as they grow and let it be a source of inspiration and strength that you know that the prophecy will be fulfilled. There'll be times you're going to doubt it. There'll be times you won't believe it. There'll be times you'll deny it. But look at these trees, and there'll be a reminder to you that God's truths will prevail. And that's what happened. Jacob told this to Joseph. He told it to his sons. He told it to the grandchildren. The grandchildren told it to the next generation and the next generation. Now Pharaoh comes, enslaves the Jews, 210 years of torture, but 210 years where they looked into their plantations and they saw the cedar trees. And they knew, based on what they would learn from the Zaidi and the Bubby and the previous generation passed down, that we will be saved. We will be free. How do we know? The cedar trees. The cedar trees. Now,
They smell, they look different.
now Moshe comes to the Jews and says, time to leave, time to go. They take their axes. They go to the cedar trees planted by great Zaidi Jacob and nurtured by all the generations of Jews in Egypt, Israelites. They chop down the cedar trees. They load up their wagons because Jacob said, when you leave, you take those trees. And they travel through the Sinai desert with these cedar trees.
Oh, God.
And God says to them, make me a tabernacle with what? cedar trees, atzei shitim. I mean, could you be any more beautiful than that? And they begin to build the tabernacle from atzei shitim. Now we have to see who are our cedar trees? Who are our cedar trees? Who are our cedar trees? Because if it's a prophecy for then, it's a prophecy for now. When you're feeling down and out, when you're feeling depressed, when you're feeling disoriented, when you're feeling disconnected, when you're feeling apathetic, when you're feeling angry, when you're feeling depressed, you have to remember the cedar trees. It says in Psalms, Tzadik hatamer yifrach ke'erez balvanin yizgeh. The tzaddik shall bloom as a palm, and as a cedar of Lebanon he shall flourish. So who is the cedar tree now for us? Metaphorically speaking, what do we look at now when we're feeling the enslavement, the pain, the anger, this disorientation, the suffering in our own ways? Everyone feels moments of discontent and disenchantment and disconnection and anger. And even now, it's very disorienting in our times. And when I always say Mashiach to myself and to my children and to you, you were all thinking the same thing. Come on. Sounds very nice in Torah class. The rabbi always says it in the sermon, and we're going to rebuild the third temple, and there'll be the ingathering of the exiles. And what are we all thinking when we're sitting in Shul davening Shabbos? Because my husband says it every Shabbos. Okay, yeah, it's the rabbi talking. It's the Rebbetzin talking. Yeah, sounds very nice, but come on, I'm going back to my little tabernacle. I ain't seeing any Mashiach. I don't see any redemptions. There's no cedar trees in my backyard. Okay, very nice, very, very nice. Nicely said, nicely written. Really, I don't even know if there's such a thing as Mashiach. It sounds very Christian. Sounds very Catholic. It sounds very like, oh, we don't believe in that. The second coming, Gott in Himmel. Right? I'm saying what I feel, right? We all feel it. We feel very disconnected from this very abstract idea. So the Psalm says, who are our cedar trees? It's the tzaddikim. To me, it was always the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife. The cedar tree says it's the tzaddikim. You look at the righteous people. You look up at them and you realize that, yes, there is a vision. There is a belief. There is a God. Look up a little higher at somebody who represents a cedar tree, who represents standing tall, standing proud, and having the faith. If the Jews in Egypt, for 210 years, they were slaves, their children were taken away, they looked at a cedar tree and believed, how much more so us, how we can look up at our metaphorical cedar trees and say, you know what? God promised us there's going to be a third Beis HaMikdash. There is going to be a Mashiach that's going to come and say to the Jews, time to get up, time to go to the land of Israel. And by the way, I read something interesting. You're not going to give up your beautiful house. All of our homes, all of our beautiful lives, the good parts will go with us. The world will expand to become the land of Israel. It's a good thing. Like when I was a little girl, we said there'll be ice cream growing on trees. No, it means the world the way it was meant to be. At the beginning of time, God created a perfect world. And Adam and Eve, a perfection. That's what we're talking about, a world that has love, no pain, no sorrow, no crime, no illness. We're not talking about like it says we're going to be on the wings of eagles. We're not talking about a life that's going to make us be, oh, wow, I don't want this life. You're going to want this life. So if you could just have a little imagination that everything that's imperfect will now be perfect, that's Mashiach. Mashiach is not really a radical idea. We had Mashiach. We had the beginning of the world was the perfect world. just got loaded up with all kinds of stuff over the years. We disconnected from our source. We got lost. We went to Buddha, we went to India, we went to here, we went to there. It's going to be the greatest unity, reunion, I call it. Your college reunion, think of a reunion of the universe. You're going to wake up in the morning and just feel happy and good. What's so terrible about that? So take Mashiach in a lighter form. Don't look at it like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to wear a white robe and pray 10 times a day, as is once a day makes me crazy. Look at it that the world will be what it's meant to be. That's how we look at Mashiach. And how do we envision it? Look at a cedar tree. Look at somebody you can respect, look up to, that has faith. Connect to someone who has faith, and your life will be so much better. I connect to my sister. She has a tremendous amount of faith, my sister. Whenever I'm down a night, I call her because she lifts me up and she says, remember, there's a divine plan. Remember, it's not about you. It's about what God wants for you. You find someone who's your cedar tree. You need a cedar tree. That's what the Torah is telling us. The cedar. Where did they get cedar wood? This is where they got it. So we all need cedar. Now I want to share something that I want to end off on this because I love it. It's just one of the most powerful, powerful messages in the Torah. Are we good? Any questions? We have to start with a story.
Don't they plant cedar trees around cemeteries? Is
Are
that
there
what-
trees that are like weeping willows? They don't let moisture.
No,
I'm
the
not
long,
sure.
thin ones.
I don't know. Might be that it's a custom. But maybe now you know why cedar wood repels moths. They don't eat up your clothing. Although my clothing always managed to get holes. I don't know how. There's something, even with all my cedar wood, I don't use mothballs because my kids tell me, Ma, if you use mothballs, your clothes will have the odor of great-great-grandma Stell or something. So,
I think it's fascinating also that there's a very strong smell, a scent of cedar. Sometimes memories are connected to scent and smells, and it just brings you back. I don't know, just
you're right.
there's got to be something there.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So we spoke a lot today, a lot of concepts, but there's so many nice things. I didn't really know which one will like resonate. I mean, I love the cedar thing. I think to me, that's like, yeah, you need a cedar tree in your life. You know what I mean? It's funny because, so the story. The story is like this. So if you ever read the book, The Jew and the Lotus, anybody read about it? It's a fascinating book. And in this book is a story that in the 1990s, the Dalai Lama called up a group of Jewish scholars and rabbis. He wanted to meet with them because he tells them like this. In the 1950s, the Dalai Lama was exiled from Tibet and he settled, I think, somewhere in the Indies. Correct me if I'm wrong. And he said to this group of rabbis and scholars, I need to know the secret to Judaism, to your religion, where for thousands of years you've been exiled from the land of Israel, and yet you all retain your religion, your identity, your Torah. What is your secret? He asks them. Because now that I realize my exile might be permanent, how do I keep my religion going? So before I tell you what they told him, let me tell you another story, a very fascinating story. Did all of you know the story already with the Dalai Lama? Okay.
No,
I don't want to be repetitive. So the story's like this. If you remember this Queen Victoria, she went on a baby moon in her 7th month to Hanover, Germany, because her husband, Prince Albert, was from Hanover. So they go on a baby moon. And it's in her 7th month. And suddenly she goes into premature labor. So in her palace in Germany, her advisors go into a panic. Why? If the baby is born in Germany, it can't be heir to the throne of England. It has to be born on English soil. They don't know what to do. Now, Moses Montefiore, Sir Moses, happens to be in Hanover on business. He's a very big businessman, and he's in the palace because, remember, he's advisor to the queen, and he hears what's going on. So when he goes to Shul to daven mincha in Hanover, he tells Rabbi Nathan Adler, who was the rabbi in the Shul, the story with the queen. So Nathan Adler, Rabbi Adler, gives him amazing advice. And he runs back to the Queen's Palace in Hanover, and he tells the advisors this advice in the name of Rabbi Adler. He says, Rabbi Adler said, find the nearest English warship, put her quickly on this warship, go out in the ship into international waters, and if the baby is born on international waters on an English warship, the baby is now English. No problem. They quickly call the warship. They quickly put her on. They roll it it's like 5 kilometers into international waters, and Baruch Hashem, the baby is born, heir to the throne. King George VII is born.
Wow.
Now, I want to just give you the end of the story, and then I'll tie it in. Now, what happens now? Queen Victoria never forgets this Rabbi Adler. He saved her dynasty. Fast forward, she's reading the newspaper and she sees an ad that the largest shul in London, Duke's Synagogue, is looking for a rabbi. They need a new rabbi. The largest shul in England needs a rabbi. So she writes them a note that I would recommend Rabbi Nathan Adler to become your rabbi. I strongly recommend. So they hire Rabbi Adler to be their rabbi in London, the Duke's Shul. And now, even more, she brings a motion to Parliament that she will now like to have a chief rabbi for the British Empire. She wants to institute there should be a chief rabbi for the British Empire. And she suggests that they appoint Dr. Nathan Adler as the chief rabbi. The Parliament votes, and that's how England always has a chief rabbi. And Nathan Adler was chief rabbi. He passed away 11 years before Queen Victoria, because she never forgot what he did for her. So Nathan Adler, how does a Jew know? Because what is the Jew? What are we? We are V'shasali Mikdash V'shachanti B'saycham. Every Jew is a mishkan. Every Jew is a tabernacle. Wherever we are, that's where Torah is. That's where God is. That's where our religion is. We don't need to be based in the land of Israel to keep our Torah. Our Torah travels wherever we are. That's Nathan Adler's insight. That wherever you are, you travel and you have it with you. And that's what they told the Dalai Lama. We're not tied to geography. We're not tied to property rights. We're tied to our soul, to God. That's why Kabbalah says, Kutshabrichu Yisrael v'Torah kulam chadheim. The Jewish people, God, and the Torah are one. Wherever you are, God is, and the Torah is. It's part of you. And that is the secret to our eternity, that we are not bound to time, to place. Wherever we are, the Torah is with us. And that's why in this week's Torah portion is something very fascinating. That when they built the articles, the table, the golden ark that held the broken 10 commandments and the regular 10 commandments, and all the other vessels, the menorah, they were very heavy. Now the Jews were traveling. This was a traveling tabernacle. So every one of the heavy vessels had poles, with rings. Remember in those movies like Aladdin, they stick the poles in, right? And they carry, right?
Mhm.
You can envision it?
Yeah.
Right? So there's rings, there's poles, 4 people carry. So every time they traveled, they stuck the poles into the objects. They disassembled and off they went. 42 times they assembled and disassembled, assembled and disassembled. until they came to Israel. And then again, we said the hundreds of years the temple stood, the Beis HaMikdash stood. So where were the poles when they weren't traveling? They put it on the side, right? Ready to travel, bring out the poles, stick it in the vessels and carry. But there was one object in the tabernacle that God said, those poles must be permanently attached. Which object? Take a guess.
The Rosh Chodesh? Rosh
Okay.
Chodesh? I don't know.
Means the month, the Jewish month. More of which?
Oh, I meant the eternal light.
Oh, no. Ner Tamid, no, not that one.
The ark?
The ark. Excellent. Why, Jane?
Oh, because the Torah's in there,
Right, so?
but that has to be permanent.
Excellent.
That's permanent in our lives, wherever we are.
Wherever we are, it always travels. This is the insight based on Hasidus that wherever we are, the Torah is. Those poles never get detached. You know why? Because that Torah travels with us wherever we are forever. This is how we have the insight that wherever we are, the Torah is. And you even see it in the tabernacle where the poles are permanently attached to the ark. They are never removed. Teaches us, you travel. Have Torah will travel. Have Torah will travel. So does anybody want to add anything before we sum up the class? And then I quickly do the 4 mitzvahs of Purim. So I'll start summing up if you want to add. So that we opened up with the concept that we take from God in order to give. As a matter of fact, that's why it says that God lives in the heart of those who gives, not in the object. Where is God? In the heart of those who give, not in the object made out of stone. God truly rests in us. And if you give, you're going to see life as a gift. When you give, it opens up your heart to see life as a gift. Then you know that everything you give, you are getting from God. It's a gift to you. It's a gift. And then we discussed that each and every one of us has to become a tabernacle, a dwelling place for godliness, for holiness. How do we make ourselves a tabernacle? By connecting to godly things, doing godly acts. Tzedakah, Shabbos candles, mikvah, kosher, mezuzah, kindness, goodness, love, sharing love. You I love. And wherever we are, the Torah is. It's not disconnected from us. It's not like, oh, I forgot my prayer book at home. I forgot my Torah at home. It's with you wherever you are.
It's our core values we take wherever we go,
Exactly.
that we learn
Yeah.
from our parents.
You know, I don't know if I told you this. I was in Israel with a group, bar mitzvah student from our shul. Took my husband along. And about a week before, they surprised me with a ticket too. They said, we're going to take you along. And wherever we went, my husband and I speak Yiddish. We spoke Yiddish to a lot of people. And they came and they said, the rabbi and Freida know everyone in Israel. I said, it's not that we know everyone in Israel. We know the language. We have the lingo. When you have the lingo and you have the Torah, you know everybody. You have a sprach, you know? You have a language because they're your people. That's what it is. So the 4 mitzvahs of Purim. So Friday. So Thursday night we hear Megillah. Friday during the day we hear Megillah from the Megillah scroll. Okay, just a little preview. I don't know how to read. From that. Okay, when you hear the name of Haman, don't forget your noisemaker. It's a wonderful thing to wipe out his name. And then the mitzvah of having a feast on Friday. So have a feast, you wash, you make a bracha, put down a nice pre-Shabbos meal. Friday afternoon, give tzedakah to 2 people or 2 places. So 1 penny to one place, 1 penny to another place. You could give a little more than a penny, is also good. And then the 4th mitzvah is the mitzvah of shalach manas, giving a food portion to another Jew. A food portion means 2 types of blessings. So if it's a borei mine mizonos hamantash, you can now take a candy bar, a can of soda, a bottle of wine. You could send a fruit and a hamantash. 2 blessings to 1 Jewish person. Now, why do we do that? Because again, the whole theme of Purim was unity. Unity. How do we show unity? You share food with another person. You give a food gift. Another way is tzedakah, giving to the poor, giving to the needy, giving to an organization. And reading the Megillah is again connecting to that's not a story that happened then, it's a story that happens now. So twice we hear the Megillah read by the cantor or the rabbi in shul, or if you have someone who knows how to read the scroll at home, beautiful, beautiful thing to participate. Try to do the 4 mitzvahs. That's how you make yourself a little dwelling place. The feast is easy, right? It's easy to make a feast. Very easy to make a feast. At our shul, we will be having socially distanced Thursday night Megillah reading after right when we break our fasts, which is like 6 o'clock. Then Friday afternoon at our shul, we're going to do a Megillah reading, followed by a Purim feast, socially distanced, followed by Shabbat services, followed by Shabbat Kiddush. So if you're worried about cooking a feast, you could come. We're going to have a socially distant feast, socially distant Megillah reading, socially distant Shabbos services, socially distant Shabbos Kiddush. Everybody wears a mask. Everybody's very careful, and it's really beautiful to do it. We've had people who sit outside by the door and listen in that way. Whatever makes you happy, join us. It's better. The mitzvah is done in real life. It's the Megillah scroll. You have to hear the actual voice. It's preferable not to do it on Zoom if you want to fulfill the mitzvah. But again, we're in pandemic. The world is in a crisis. So everything readjusts. God knows if you stay home, you're fine. Okay? Remember, wherever you are is where God is. Okay. So that's the mitzvahs of Purim, and we should have a happy Purim, a joyous, like it says, the Jews had joy and happiness, and that's how it should be in our lives. We say it every Saturday night in the Havdalah, we say this passage. So we'll close off the class. If anybody has a comment or has something they want to say.
What costume are you going to wear, Freida?